The topic today was brought to my attention by a listener on Sunday. I believe his name was Joel. He commented on my Tua video, and before he really brought this to my attention, I'll be honest with you, I haven't really thought much about it. Part of the reason I haven't thought about it is because the Detroit Lions have been close to irrelevant the majority of my lifetime, at least since Barry Sanders retired in the late 90s. Another reason I haven't thought about it is because the Lions and Matt Patricia and all the fuck-ups that they have made have been overshadowed by Bill O'Brien literally burning the Texans to the ground. The Lions are one of the worst franchises in the NFL. There's no argument about it. I wouldn't put them on the level of the Cincinnati Bengals or the Cleveland Browns, but they are damn close. They've made the playoffs 3 times in the past 20 years. Haven't won a playoff game since 1991. The Lions have been terrible for decades. When a team is consistently bad for this long, the bulk of the blame, in my opinion, falls on the ownership. The Ford family's owned the Lions since the 1960s, and the Lions have sucked since the 1960s. One of the reasons they've been so bad, they hire awful head coaches. Just listen to this list of head coaches that have been in Detroit the past 20 years. Gary Miller, however you pronounce it. Never heard of him. I bet most of you haven't either. Marty Mornhinweg, terrible. Steve Mariucci. Okay, Mariucci was a good hire, but like a lot of the predecessors before him, he couldn't win in Detroit either. Ron Marinelli, terrible. Jim Schwartz, terrible. Some of these guys are great coordinators, but have no business being a head coach in the NFL. The best coach in Detroit over the last 20 years is Jim fucking Caldwell. And I don't see teams beating down his door, begging him to come coach their team. In terms of wins and losses, Caldwell was the best coach the Lions have had since the 1950s, and he only won 56% of his games. The Ford family continued their streak of hiring bad head coaches a couple of years ago when they hired Matt Patricia. Now, I understand their thinking behind hiring Matt Patricia. He coached under Bill Belichick for 13, 14 years. He was the defensive coordinator in New England for 6 or 7 of those years. But just because you coach under Bill Belichick doesn't mean you're going to be a great NFL head coach. Actually, it seems to be the opposite. Bill Belichick has 9 former coordinators that have coached in the league. They all have one thing in common. They lose a shitload of football games. The best head coach in Belichick's coaching tree is Bill O'Brien in Houston. And as we've seen this offseason, he is insane. Matt Patricia's 2 years in Detroit have been nothing short of a disaster. He's won 9 games in 2 years. You can partially blame last season on Matt Stafford and his injury. I believe he missed like half the season. But the Lions weren't going to go anywhere even with Matt Stafford at quarterback. And the wheels are continuing to fall off for Matt Patricia. Here's the thing. If you're not winning as a coach, but you have the support and the backing of your players, management and ownership might cut you a little extra slack. They might not fire you after 2 straight losing seasons. Just look at what happened last year in Atlanta with Dan Quinn. The Falcons were terrible the first half of the year. I believe they were 1-7 going into their Week 8 or Week 9 matchup against the Saints in New Orleans. Arthur Blank is contemplating firing Dan Quinn. Julio Jones comes out and supports him. Several other players on the Falcons roster came out and supported Dan Quinn. And look what happened. The Falcons got it together the second half of the season, started winning some games, and they saved Dan Quinn's job. That is not happening right now in Detroit. Actually, the opposite is happening. Last month, Darius Slay was practically begging to get out of Detroit. After they traded him to the Eagles, Slay had great things to say about the staff in Detroit, the fans in Detroit. He didn't have anything good to say about Matt Patricia. Actually, he trashed him, said he had no respect for him. When you hear that from one player, you might can write that off as someone being disgruntled, sour grapes, whatever the fuck. But when you have multiple players come out against Matt Patricia, then you've got a problem in Detroit. Glover Quinn, who is now retired, played in Detroit from 2013 to 2018. So he was there through Jim Schwartz, Jim Caldwell, and Matt Patricia. Glover Quinn came out and said that Matt Patricia came into Detroit wanting to tear down the organization and rebuild the culture into a winning culture. He wanted to change the mentality to a winning mentality. Now, I agree 100% with Matt Patricia wanting to do that. God knows the Lions have had a culture of losing for fucking decades. But in order to effectively do that, you've got to have the respect of the players. And Matt Patricia fucked that up from the beginning. Glover Quinn said no one on the team bought into Matt Patricia because he came in arrogant. And the players wouldn't listen to him because of the way he presented himself. Things are so bad in that locker room that it started to spread across the league. When Damon Harrison was traded from the Giants to the Lions a couple of years ago, he didn't answer his phone for a couple of hours because he was trying to figure out a way not to have to go to Detroit. It seems like the only person right now that is supporting Matt Patricia in Detroit is general manager Bob Quinn. And if he's not careful, he's going to be standing in the unemployment line with Matt Patricia. Quinn is obviously out of his mind because he's come out and said the players are 100% supportive of Matt Patricia. He's also said that he's not concerned about former players coming out publicly and dragging his head coach. Fucking really? If I were an NFL GM and I've got a handful of players that had the same type of problem with my head coach, it would be at the top of my priority list. The bottom line is, if things don't turn around in Detroit, both Quinn and Matt Patricia are fucking gone. Right now, Matt Patricia is fighting to overtake Bill O'Brien as the worst coach in the NFL. An honor that is now left vacant because Freddie Kitchens is no longer coaching in the league. The turnaround in Detroit needs to start this week with the draft. The Lions have got to nail this draft. They've got to have some type of positive momentum going into the 2020 season. Unfortunately, this team is not known for drafting well. Last year, they wasted their first round pick on tight end TJ Hawkinson, who was graded the 29th best tight end in that draft. The grade proved accurate because he was fucking terrible last year. If I'm Matt Patricia, I'm getting on the phone and I'm calling my old coach, Bill Belichick, and I'm asking for as many picks as he can give up and sending my number 3 pick in the first round to him so he can draft Tua. The Lions need as many picks as they can get to shore up the defensive side, especially since they traded their best fucking player on defense in Darius Slay. The problem is, I'm not so sure that New England is going to need to trade up that high to draft Tua. So to answer the question that is in the title of this video, is Matt Patricia on the hot seat in Detroit? Well, hell yeah, he is. That seat is a smoldering ass fire right now. He should have been fired last year. But I think Stafford's injury, along with Matt Patricia's close relationship with Bob Quinn, bought him another year in Detroit. I think it was a mistake. When things are going this badly, they aren't just going to magically work out. The bottom line is, Matt Patricia's in over his head. And that's not going to change in one off season. You look back at the history of the NFL, it is not a good idea to keep a coach around when it is clearly not working. It's actually better to fire them sooner rather than later. The Jets kept Todd Bowles around for 4 years, It was clear after 2 years in New York that it was not working out, though they did win 10 games in his first season. Still didn't qualify for the playoffs. But the Jets kept him around anyway, thinking that things will turn around, thinking it'll be better next year. Todd Bowles won a total of 9 games his last 2 years in New York. Tampa Bay did the same thing with Dirk Cutter. Every training camp, all we heard out of Tampa for 3 years was, this is going to be our year. This is the year we turn things around and we start winning. After winning 9 games in his first year, Dirk Cutter won a total of 10 games his last 2 seasons. Should have been fired after year 2. Teams that decide to part ways quickly with coaches that aren't working out, it seems to work out for them in the long run. Seattle fired Jim Mora back in 2009-2010 after just 1 disastrous season. Hired Pete Carroll, won a Super Bowl. The 49ers fired 2 head coaches consecutively after 1 long season. Jim Tomsula and Chip Kelly. Hired Kyle Shanahan. I'd say that's working out pretty well for him in San Francisco. I don't see Matt Patricia turning this thing around in Detroit. He traded their best cornerback, traded their best receiver in Golden Tate. The offensive line is god-awful, and the defense, which is supposed to be Matt Patricia's specialty, is a heaping pile of garbage. Right now, it's looking like the Lions in 2020 are going to be worse than they were last year. ESPN debuted The Last Dance on Sunday night, and for those of you that don't know, this is a 10-part documentary series about Michael Jordan and the 97-98 Chicago Bulls. And as expected, the debate topics coming out of this documentary have already begun. Who's the best player of all time, Michael Jordan or LeBron James? Which was the greatest dynasty of all time, the Chicago Bulls or the Golden State Warriors? Ever since Michael Jordan retired from the NBA has been waiting on the next Michael Jordan. People always compare LeBron to him. Michael Jordan was better than LeBron. The only player who came close to matching Jordan's greatness was Kobe Bryant. Now, obviously, the Bulls dynasty was better than Golden State's. I mean, you can judge that by championships alone. It's hard to make an argument that the Warriors had the better dynasty when they only won 3 titles and the Bulls won 6. I think Chicago would have actually won 8 in a row in the 90s had Michael Jordan not retired for 18 months to go play baseball. But I do feel like Steph Curry and the Warriors had a bigger impact on the game of basketball than Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And before I get into that, just let me start by saying that there is no individual player that will ever impact the game like Michael Jordan did. When he retired, regular season ratings in the NBA dropped like 20 or 30%. The 98 NBA Finals, the last finals he played in, was watched by an average of 30 million people. The very next year, 1999, 15 million people tuned into the NBA Finals. So Jordan's impact was huge. The league went into a free fall until LeBron James entered into his prime. So I'm not taking anything away from Jordan and the Bulls when I say this. But Steph Curry and the Warriors changed how the way the game of basketball is played. Teams weren't shooting 43s a game until Steph Curry. There wasn't small ball until the Warriors started playing with their death lineup, where the tallest guy on the court was 6'7". So I do feel like Golden State's dynasty had a bigger impact on the play of the game in the NBA than Jordan and the Bulls. Now, I saw on Twitter Sunday night where people were debating who would win in a 7-game series, the 72-win Bulls or the 73-win Warriors. To me, it's not even close. Golden State wouldn't have a chance. That 72-win Bulls team had a lineup of Dennis Rodman, Tony Kukoc, Ron Harper, Scottie Pippen, and Michael Jordan. The Warriors' death lineup consisted of Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andre Iguodala, Harrison Barnes, and Draymond Green. Now, who in that lineup is out-rebounding Dennis Rodman? Who is going to guard Michael Jordan? You got the better coach in Chicago and Phil Jackson. Now, I think that the Bulls would struggle defensively trying to guard against Golden State, but I think in a 7-game series, the Bulls would win. It's not even a question to me. One thing I don't understand, though, when we get to talking about dynasties in sports, the Patriots in the NFL, the Bulls and the Warriors in the NBA, Yankees in Major League Baseball, no one ever mentions the San Antonio Spurs. Why is that? Greg Popovich and the Spurs don't really get the respect that they deserve. Pop and the Spurs have made the playoffs 23 straight years, 5 NBA titles. It's considered a failure in San Antonio if the Spurs make the playoffs and get bounced in the first round. I think the main reason that the Spurs don't get as much recognition as teams like the Bulls, the Lakers, the Warriors, was because San Antonio never had flashy star players. For as great of a basketball player as Tim Duncan was, he was very bland. Hell, Greg Popovich is boring as hell. The only interesting thing about Tony Parker was when he was married to Eva Longoria. The Spurs were never an entertaining basketball team. Very blue collar, very low key, which is fine because it's worked for them for 23 years, but it's not something that's going to spike ratings or get people interested in watching them. You look back at when the Spurs were their most dominant, when they were the best team in the league, that run from 02 to 07 when they won 3 titles in 5 years. NBA ratings were in the shitter during that time. That's the thing that separates teams like the 90s Bulls or the Steph Curry Warriors, LeBron and D-Wade in Miami, from the San Antonio Spurs. Those guys and those teams are entertaining. They're as interesting off the court as they are on the court. We've had documentaries about Dwayne Wade, obviously Michael Jordan. There will be one eventually on LeBron James, Steph Curry. I doubt that we will ever see a documentary series on Tim Duncan or Greg Popovich and the San Antonio Spurs because they're just boring. The Patriots are the same way in the NFL. Bill Belichick and Tom Brady have always been kind of criticized, for lack of a better word, for being bland, for being boring. Their press conferences are dull. You don't get any information out of them. But you don't have to be as entertaining off the field in the NFL because the game itself is entertaining enough. It's not like that in the NBA. For most people, besides the playoffs, the most exciting part of the NBA season is free agency in July. The Detroit Pistons back in 2004 were a great team, one of the best defensive teams the league has ever seen. But no one really remembers them because they didn't have any star players. They didn't have any flashy players. They were painful to watch. No one wants to watch an 80 to 75 basketball game. We want to see points. We want to see 120 to 115 instead. That Pistons team is more remembered for the malice at the palace than they are for winning the title. All right, that's all for today. Kind of got sidetracked at the end there. I meant to talk, about the Bulls and the Warriors. Somehow ended up with the 2004 Detroit Pistons. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for me. Click that notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Leave me a comment in the section below. Let me know what you think about the future of Matt Patricia in Detroit. Let me know what you think of the Last Dance documentary on the 97-98 Bulls, whether or not they could beat Steph Curry and the Warriors in a 7-game series. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Enjoy your Tuesday, and I will see you next time.